So I would like to take this opportunity and keep it very short to invite all of you to the creative writing session, an idea construed by Pawan Mishra. Um, and all of you know who he is, what he did, and so on and so forth. But he is a acclaimed author, and if you guys go in and search on Google, it'll come out. He has a passion for creative writing, and he is in the senior leadership, senior executive in the corporate world. I don't want to reveal the name of the company and so on and so forth, but apart from his corporate world and the busy schedule that he has taken the time to impart and work with the youngsters in terms of developing their creative writing skills with the sole purpose of making each and every one of you an author in your own right. Believe me when I say an author in your own right. That's his goal. And he is very passionate about working with you guys to achieve and realize that goal for each one of you. With that, Pawan, I would like to hand it over to you and thank you very much. I can't say enough about it, of how much of a gratitude we have for taking this time and creating this program.
Thank you,
And
Suresh.
lastly, I do want to highlight Ramya, Vidya, and Bose, instrumental in helping us creating this.
Thank you, Suresh, and thank you, Ramya and Bose as well. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for doing a lot of heavy lifting around this, making sure that we're able to do this. Um, so I will say welcome everyone. Congratulations first on registering into this course. It's not easy to spend time on something which is not part of your essential activities in your life, right? So thanks for pursuing passion of your heart, dedicating time. And I know some of you have even dialed from West Coast. Can you guys raise hand if you're from West Coast so that we can see how many of you are from West Coast? So I see one hand, two, let me see, three. Yeah. So thank you for that dedication.
Four of them.
Four of them. All right. Getting early on a Saturday morning is not easy. Is there anybody from India? I know there's some parents express interest from India. Are there any people from India here? Raise your hand if you're from India or outside US. All right, great. So earlier I was thinking that just I'm going to be speaking and I won't bring in any material here because sometimes material distracts you, like you end up paying too much focus on the material. But then later on, I thought about doing, some slides for focusing on certain, ideas, certain points that you can look at, and then I can share that material even after this session as well, or after every session, so that you can go through what was discussed and can have those kind of salient features or points for later on. So I'll start sharing a slide here. And questions, we will have time at the end for questions. We leave about like 5 or 10 minutes for questions. So keep your questions, note them down somewhere. It's such a big group that we just want to be respectful with the time. So just make sure you note down your question for the end. All right. So this is what we will cover in today's session. So we will talk about course logistics. So how we're going to run this course, what it means, and then what do we expect from you. So this is not going to be a heavy lifting. It is designed that way, but there are few things that we will expect from you so that you leverage this course in the best way. So we'll talk about that. And then we will get into how does it feel to be a writer, because it's not easy. Like any other profession, you have ups and downs. You have feelings that you feel like that it's only you kind of experiencing them. I want to talk about what it is being a writer so that you understand that, hey, all writers go through it. All right, then we'll talk about structure of the story. So story is the foundational part of fiction writing. And in, I would say in reality, in any writing. So even if you go and do public speaking, even if you're writing any other form of writings, being a storyteller really helps, right? So we'll talk about what is the structure of a story. And then we will talk about types of story narrative. So how you tell stories is very important, right? So we'll get into that. And then I think this is, again, typing mistake here. So let's get going. So course logistics, we will have total of 12 sessions every Saturday, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern time, as you already know. We will have light home assignments after each session. They will be due by end of Wednesday. All right. So they will be due by Wednesday. We have a Google Docs that Suresh has created. Thanks, Suresh, for doing that. And it's organized by sessions. So session 1 folder. After this session, if you guys can upload your assignments there. And we said by end of Wednesday, because that gives me 2 days, Thursday and Friday, before we meet again on Saturday, right? So make sure it's done by end of Wednesday. Now it's not mandatory because we don't want to make it like a real formal college course. We want to have that flexibility with your time in how much you can dedicate to this course. But at the same time, if you want to leverage this course, if you want to really, come out with good learning, I would highly encourage you guys to complete all assignments. And they're going to be not that time consuming. They're going to be on the lighter side. Then by Friday end of day, I'm going to be putting my comments on each individual assignments for you guys so that you have something to think about, right? So it'll be feedback and some comments, what could make them, your writings better. We are going to video record every session, and going forward, I'm going to disable the waiting room so that we don't have any distractions like today. Um, so if you miss a session, you can go back and look at previous session. You do your home assignment related to that particular session, and you can come back in the next session like you never missed a beat. So that's why we are video recording these sessions right now. In case you have any questions between the classes, there's a WhatsApp group. You can ask that question on WhatsApp group. If you feel like the question is very much individual to yourself and you don't want like a bigger group to look at your question, then you can feel free to send me an email. But I highly encourage to ask a question in the WhatsApp group, even if it is about your individual story, because then I think other people can learn from your own experience as well. All right. So what's the goal of this course? To keep it very simple, write a story that is 100% your own and unputdownable. What that means is that we will embark on a process that is going to discover a story within yourself, from within yourself, and then make it interesting, such that if there's a reader who reads your story, will feel like he or she cannot put it down. So that, in simple terms, is the objective goal of this course. Sorry, I keep clicking on this. So we will start with a 5-sentence story, just 5 sentences. And then we will expand on that story with every session. So every session is going to focus on 1, 2, or 3 vital aspects of storytelling and fiction writing. And with every session, we will expand your story, right? So we will go through that process, and by end of the course, not only you will have a fantastic story, but you will also know all aspects of story writing. So you can write another story without that much of assistance. So just keeping it simple, the objective of the course is we come out, we have a story done by you, each one of you, and that's your own. You're not going Googling, you're not copying, pasting from anywhere. It's just coming from within your heart. So what's expected from you as part of this course? Firstly, don't focus on taking notes, because the material is going to be available in the Google Docs. So this video, every session's video, as well as the material I'm going to be sharing, is all going to be available to you guys after the session. So don't spend time on taking notes, because it distracts from paying attention to the live session. So that's one. Commit time for learning and practicing the craft. Read and write regularly. So it's very important. A software engineer or developer, coder, only becomes really a good developer or engineer by practice. Same thing for any other profession, for a mathematician or a scientist. It's no different for writing, because we feel that way. Sometimes we feel like writing is something on the side that we do, right? It's not that way. You need to read, you need to write a lot to be a good writer. So commit yourself for learning and practicing the craft, right? It's very important. It doesn't have to be like 2 hours every day, right? It could be just 10 minutes, 15 minutes every day, and maybe half an hour on weekends. But keep in touch with your writing passion. That's very important. Read like how a writer would. So many of us, when we are reading or watching a movie, we're just reading and watching to enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with that. Most people do that. But if you want to be a writer, you have to really watch a movie or read a novel or read a story as a writer. So, what does that mean? That means really to understand what is making you so interested in that story. So, almost like you're watching the story, then you're taking yourself to the balcony. Like there's a phrase that we often say, going to the balcony. That phrase means that take yourself out of the situation you are currently in and look at the situation in yourself. So if you're watching a movie in a room, you basically walk out mentally from that room and then think about what is making you so engrossed in that movie or that book or that story. So that's extremely important. That's like reading like a writer would, right? It doesn't stop at what keeps you interested. It gets into how writers describing a character, how subtle things he or she is pointing out that binding that are binding story together and things like those. So get in the habit of reading like a writer. All right. And complete all assignments on time so that you get the feedback before next session. So if you don't complete them by Wednesday, I won't have an opportunity to provide you comments on your assignments. Like I said, they're going to be light assignments, won't take a lot um, to finish them. Let me see if somebody joined again. No. All right. Trust yourself. So it happens a lot in writing business, right? Because we don't pay attention to writing as we pay to like science, maths, and other subjects, right? And then we try it and then we are not successful at it. And we start feeling like we're not made for it. We are not going to be good writers. I'm not going to be a good writer because something I just wrote is awful, right? We don't think about that, hey, it takes time. It takes time for us to kind of learn, to try and learn and try and learn and try and learn, right? So that's the process of writing. So you need to trust yourself that you will be successful, like you trust yourself when you work on any other subject. Practice is very important. Don't judge yourself too hard, because sometimes you might feel some piece that you've written, and I've met many people who thought they've not written something good and their creation was really good. Just because you've gone through it like 20 times, 30 times, starts to bore you at times, doesn't mean it's not good, right? So don't let others judge you as well. So if somebody tells you this is awful piece of writing, don't let that discourage you. All right. Keep yourself up to date with local and global news and things going around you. It's very important. A lot of good creations, novels and movies, they were inspired by real events, real incidents, or simply somebody observing things happening around. So really pay attention what's happening, what is important for people, and what is contemporary. Right? You might think about something that happened maybe 30 years back. It may not be that much interesting for people who are living in the world today, unless it's of very highly historic consequence. So think about what's happening in the world today and what interests people, because what interests them in the real world will also likely interest them when you write about it. All right. So these are the expectations from you, and just play them in your mind always and think about them and see if you're doing a little bit of that. Don't go crazy about them. So on to how does it feel to be a writer? It's very important because, like I said earlier, many a times we get very low self-confidence and we start thinking about whether I can ever write a story, whether I can ever write a good story, whether I can ever be a good writer, or whether I can be a better writer than somebody I know. So we get into all of that because a few things that we don't know that happen with everyone. Doesn't matter if they're professional writers or if they are just starting. Right. So first thing here is writers were not born as writers. They became writers because they worked hard on their craft. A lot of things that we will talk about in this course, they worked hard on all of those things. Like many of us, their first drafts really were sloppy. And in fact, many writers go through like 20, 30, 40, even 100 revisions. And not only for a novel, they do it for every chapter sometimes. So it's that kind of rigorous process. So if you wrote something, earlier, at some point of time, and it didn't come out well, think about it. Maybe you didn't really work as hard on it as you should have, because nobody ever gets first time attempt to be their best attempt. Very, very often it's like multiple revisions. And that's why they say writing is rewriting. You cannot be a writer if you're not rewriting. And sometimes when you rewrite, you totally end up somewhere else, right? So you started somewhere, you wanted your story to be like this, but you end up somewhere totally different than you had begun with. Despite the disappointments, writers don't give up. A lot of disappointments. So let's say that somebody did like 2 chapters of a novel, starting on third chapter. It's been a month, but not a good idea crossing writer's mind. They call it writer's block, and it happens to all the writers. Or even if there is an idea, the writer may not be able to put it in a good way in words, right? You can imagine it, you can imagine exactly what is happening, but then making it real for reader is another challenge. And then when they do it, they're very disappointed by what they've written. But the key is they don't give up. They keep trying. All right, so writers never give up. Despite all the disappointments, there are always ups and downs. Sometimes they achieve a lot in 2 days, and sometimes they don't achieve much in like 2 months. They are on a constant journey to learn and improvise. Hey, Arjun, you want to ask a question? You raise your hand.
No, it's on accident.
Say that again. I couldn't hear you.
I said it was on accident. I
Okay,
didn't mean to
awesome.
raise my hand.
No worries. No worries. All right. So they're always on the journey of learning and improvising. So it's not only about, rewriting, revising. It's all about opening yourself more and more to the outside world so that you get more ideas. They keep a notebook to capture interesting thoughts, ideas, dreams, etc. And this is probably one of the most important tip that you will ever get. So ideas, like, they flash in your brain, and then if you don't capture them at times, happens very often with all writers and all individuals, for that matter, they just disappear. Your brain does not have enough power to keep all the ideas that flash in your mind readily accessible in your memory. So a lot of times a great idea flashes in your mind and you're like, okay, I'll write it later sometime. And then believe me, you won't remember that idea at times, right? So this is I would say, one of the most important tips that writers do. They always keep a notebook. Never let an idea skip. It may be an idea, it may be a thought, it may be like a dream. You woke up in the morning, you're like, oh, that was amazing dream. Like, it could be developed in a scene in a story, right? If not a story. So they are very, very, very sincere about this, right? And number of them keep their notebooks, right, always accessible. Some of them keep their, like, mobile phones. There are applications that you can really speak to, and they convert it to text and keep it there, or even voice. Later on, you can just go there and get the dump of all the ideas that you have, gathered over a period of time. So very important, because when you write a novel, you need just hundreds of ideas for hundreds of scenes that you have. And they come to you not when you sit on your table writing them, they come to you at various points of times. And then you kind of go through all of them and say, hey, this, in this particular context, in this particular writing or this particular creation, which are some of these ideas that I can really include, right? Very important. Writers are flexible about changing the direction of their work. So it happens all the times. And I hit on this few minutes back as well. So you might start the story thinking, this is what the story is going to be about. And as you start developing, it might start changing. That's totally okay. Writers believe in evolution of stories. And sometimes you feel like your characters have lives of their own. And they start telling you that, hey, this is how a story should go. And you will just let it flow. So don't just, writers don't confine themselves to their thinking that was there in the beginning. They're very flexible and open. They let their stories evolve. And I think I covered this briefly, but writers also observe the world around themselves deeply. And that includes people, how people behave, what their characters are, what some of their habits are, and things like that. So that is one of the foundational things that help writers develop their characters. And sometimes writers also turn people around them into characters. Now, caution there is that typically they tend to leave out details that will tell these characters that these, people in their real life is based on them, because you don't want your best friend to come and say, hey, you turned me into a character, right, in your book. But that happens a lot because people near you, people you observe regularly, you can easily predict their behavior and you can easily bring them in your stories. So that happens a lot. And then, as you can imagine, they get in the shoes of others to see their point of views, right? So you can't be rigid about your point of view as a writer. You always have to get into the point of views of other people in real life. All right, so writers do get into understanding point of view of people they interact with, right? Now, not to say that you do it every time, you like every time putting, fingers on your forehead and whenever somebody is talking to you, but just keep that in mind. When you're sitting alone thinking about things, pondering about your writing, think about some of the people around you. Why did they behave the way they did? If you were them, why would you behave that way, right? So don't try to change their behavior and say, if I was them, I would have done this. Then you're going down the rat hole because you basically are not thinking beyond yourself. You should rather think that if I was this person, why would I behave the way I behaved? So kind of get into some of that thinking. And that thinking is what makes writers very successful because they make their characters real. That's why when you watch a movie, good movie, you can relate with it. You can relate with characters really well. Doesn't matter whether the character is villain or hero or supporting character. Good writers make them real. All right. So that brings us to structure of a story. Now, let me put this disclaimer out there. So once you become a writer, you start experimenting. And you start experimenting, going into really unknown areas, exploring them. You tend to become very creative. So in the end, you forget about basics and you dabble into territories of experimentations, right? And I highly recommend that when you become, writers, basics, you can go anywhere you want to, right? There's no set structure to stories, right? If somebody says, hey, stories always have to stick to this, I challenge that. But I would also say that when you're learning, you should learn the basics first. Right? So before starting to break the rules that many writers do purposefully, you have to learn the rules. So the one that I'm showing here, so this is the most common structure for stories that are written across the world, right? It doesn't mean that this is the only structure that you should fit in every story, right? As you become more and more skilled, you guys are going to do a lot of experimentation with your stories, their structures, voices, and everything. But we start here. This is the starting point. So I just want to make that very clear. So majority of the stories in this world stick to this structure because it's simple and it has been proven to be successful multiple times. And very often you watch a movie, you read a novel, it goes through this structure, right? So there are essentially 5 sequential elements of this structure. Let's call it common story structure. And it goes in the order of how you start the story, how you develop it, how you are at a midpoint, then how you go from there. So first one is background information, establishment of settings. So before you start to expand on your story, you want the reader to connect with what's going on here. And sometimes it can be a conflict. Story can start with a conflict, something that bothers the main character or people around main character, right? Or at other times, it can just start with a context. People sitting in a room, having tea, conversation, right? So it could be multiple things that can go into this, but just remember, this is where your opportunity to hook the reader into a setting and background. All right. And we will go through examples of these shortly, but just understand that. So, first step of a common story structure is exposition. Second one is rising action. So, first one did the setting, conflict, problem that story is trying to solve. The second one is now all the characters rally around that problem or the setting, right, or that background. And often that rallying around results in a conflict that the main character may have, or different characters may have with each other, among each other, or villain might have with, the hero or the, main character. So it might give rise to one conflict or multiple conflicts that are detailed out in this section, right? So this basically builds from your setting. Climax, as you build the story in rising action, you always increasing tension. Why do you keep watching a movie for 3 hours? Because it builds in tension. The tension is built very gradually, right? You understood what the situation is. Now here are some conflicts. Somebody wants to do something, and if this guy does this, then what will happen to this character? Poor character. This character will be really suffering, right? All those thoughts, they come to your mind, and you worry about some characters. You feel angry at some characters. You feel supportive of some characters. You understand some characters' constraints that even though they want to do good things, they cannot do good things in current situations. So all of that goes through your mind, and it rises, the tension rises as a result of that. Climax is that point, peak point after rising action, where actually, let me see if somebody joined again. Yes. So climax is that point where the tension is at the max. So climax is basically where you are at the edge of your seat in terms of your engagement with the movie, right? Something that really peaks the tension or peaks the conflict, right? And then from there, the falling action, also called denouncement, it explores the consequence of the climax. So climax tensions are really high, right? How do we take story from that high point now down to toward the end? So that's all about the falling action. So as part of this, the tension starts to ease slowly, and the story goes toward the resolution. The resolution is the place where you finally logically concluded your story, and the reader feels like he or she had good time with your story, right? If reader in the end doesn't feel like he or she enjoyed it, like he or she spent like 2 hours on a story just to land somewhere where he or she is confused, it's not a good story. So resolution, make sure that reader is satisfied in the end. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be a good ending, right? Many movies or many books you might have read, the villain wins in those movies or books in the end. But reader is still very happy, or the movie watcher is still very happy. because it really gave good entertainment to the reader or the movie watcher. So these are the 5 steps or elements of structure of common story. It's very prevalent in most of the stories that exist. So let's take an example. And I was trying to see what might be a good example that all of you can associate with. And obviously, I've not spent a lot of time on this, so it may not seem like really a good short story, but then, it should be able to give you a good idea about what we just talked about. So let's say Lion King, what happens there? So first, let's establish the background setting. Let me see what time. All right. So Scar plots to kill his elder brother, King Mufasa, and Mufasa's son, Simba, to become the king of the animal kingdom in the pride land of Africa, right? Simple. Now, one sentence, you know the background, you know what's going on, right? So that's the exposition part. Rising action. Scar is successful in killing Mufasa and manages to convince Simba that the tragedy was Simba's own fault and advises him to leave the kingdom and never return. So as many of you might have watched that movie. I love that movie. So here, basically, Simba is convinced that he killed his father, right? And then he shouldn't come back, because if he comes back, people in the kingdom will not spare him. So that is what Scar tells Simba. So this is rising action. This is building the tension, right? Now, if you are watching that movie first time, you're like, poor Simba, what's happening with him? Can somebody tell him what's going on here, right? So you make your reader or viewer go through those emotions, right, in the rising action, and feel about the characters. Like, I'm sure people think that Scar is horrible. He's doing horrible things. And they just don't think about that. They're getting very emotional about it. Right? And Simba, how that small kid is going to survive without his family? Where is he going to go? Right? And then obviously there's a lot that goes on. And that's where the importance of really thinking in a very, very condensed way, because you want to really challenge yourself in understanding what is really in the story that I can call exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. Because it's probably 2 hours worth of movie, and there's just so much happens there, right? So climax is when Simba, who grew up as an adult away from home, decided to come back and take the kingdom. If you remember that feeling when you were watching that movie for the first time, remember your goosebumps at the scene that he's coming back to take his kingdom, finally convinced, right? And then falling action here is, as you may remember the scene where Scar is about to kill Simba, and he feels overconfident that he's going to kill him anyway. So he reveals that he killed his father. Things would have been very different without that revelation, but he does that. And Simba gets very angry and gets control of the situation. And basically then said, hey, go tell the people of the kingdom that you killed my father, right? And then everything flashes in his brain and everything, like he gets rid of that guilty feeling that everybody, all the viewers watching this movie can identify with it, guilty feeling, and can get rid of that feeling in their mind, right? That's Simba feels like that. At that one moment, that feeling goes away, not only from Simba's mind, but also from viewer's mind. Finally, resolution. So Scar begs for mercy and Simba spares his life. But Scar is Scar. He's going to do bad things. So he attacks Simba again and dies in the process. And Simba becomes the king again. So think about any story, any movie, any book, that fits this structure. Some may not, right? But most will. So think about, any story you read, any novel you read, any movie you watch in this, and think about what was the real setting. Like first step, background setting, what was the rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. All right, let's get going to the next section. So lastly, I want to, in this session, we'll end in like next 15 minutes or so. So I just want to go through quickly about point of view before I take questions and talk about assignments. So it's very simple. And I made these examples myself. And I've taken one event that parents forget birthday of a girl, 13th birthday. So point of view is how you want to tell story. You can say, I couldn't believe my parents forgot my 13th birthday. It was already late in the afternoon and I was really sad that nobody came to me and said happy birthday, right? So I'm telling my story, first person. It's a lot about I'm feeling, I'm describing, right? So you're telling the story in first person. You can have the story be told in third person as well. So other characters and feelings and beliefs are only available from your impressions, right? So you cannot talk like first person because you are a first person, you know how you're feeling. But when you're telling a story in third person, you don't know the real feelings. You only get impressions, right? Her parents totally forgot her 13th birthday. She did not seem very happy about it. So observer here, the person narrator here, does not know enough those deep insights into her feelings because the narrator is not herself, right? Third person, omniscient. And this is also called omniscient. So this is the narrator who knows everything. Doesn't matter how secret you are in your life. This narrator actually enters your mind and describes exactly how you're feeling, right? So the narrator has access to all inner thoughts of all the characters, right? So here is how it goes. She couldn't believe her parents forgot her 13th birthday. It was already late in the afternoon and she was sad. So factually, she was sad, right? It's not like she might be sad, she was seemingly sad. She was sad. Lastly, observer, observer is not taking part into settings, and observer is also not knowing exact details of their feelings. So observer is generally telling you, narrating the story based on what he or she observes. So these are like four voices. You can adopt one of these voices while writing one story. There's some complex novels that utilize multiple voices, but for now, just imagine one voice that you want to adopt. And we'll get into details of this in future sessions. But because we wanted to start with some assignments, I wanted to bring this up so that you have this at the back of your mind. Now to homework. Think of your favorite movie or book, right? Doesn't matter because we're talking about storytelling here. Rewrite that movie or book in 5-story structure. So, and I have a template out there on Google Docs. We'll send you a link. So copy that template, save it in your name. And this template has already those 5 elements. Next to each elements, like I did for Lion King story, just put your story in front of every element, put the sentence or 2. So ideally, I would love to have 5 sentences. If you can condense stories, still make it meaningful. but then up to 10 sentences are fine, right? Again, this is still not your story. We will start on your story next session. This is the story of an existing movie you liked or book you liked. So break that into 5 sentence story or 10 sentence story, somewhere between them, and then identify which sentences belong to which element of story structure. All right. So that is all for today. And I will open it up for questions from you guys. And for those of you who couldn't join on time and join a little bit late, this session is being recorded. I'm going to send a link to the recording as well, so that you guys can go through the entire session, so that you can make sense of what we talked about today and then complete your assignments by Wednesday. All right, so that is all. I'm going to go. Actually, I can keep sharing still, because we might want to go to another slide based on questions. So if you want to ask a question, you can unmute yourself and ask your question now.
Sorry, just like go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. I just have a. Okay, sorry, my dogs are barking. So, in the structure, I've heard it said that the theme should be fully revealed by the climax, but I've also heard that it should be fully revealed by the falling action, like for writing. Which one is more correct?
So that's a very good question. I would say it depends really. And I think what, in my opinion, and you will get multiple answers to this question based on experiences. You know, there's tons of material, tons of novels that have been written. You will find examples of each one of these. But I would say that depends on how, I would say, how near the end climax really happens, right? It depends on that, because if climax is very next to the end, right, it changes everything, right? You can pretty much reveal everything and end very quickly. But if the climax is happening, let's say, 30 minutes before the end of the movie, you still want people to be interested and watch the remaining 30 minutes of the movie as well. So I think it depends on that, in my opinion. It's a good question. And like I said, one thing that you will realize as you become professional writers, that there are no set rules. Sometimes people hit you with the what you would otherwise have a climax in the first scene, and then build a story from there, right? And I don't know if you guys have seen movies like Run Lola Run, different perspectives, things like that. They're very creative creations out there that people have done, right? So it all depends on what kind of author you are, what kind of story you want to write. It's very personal to you as an author and to people that you want to identify with. Like, you always have certain target audience you have in mind, people who would love your book. Make sense? Great question. Thank you. What other questions you guys have? Any questions on assignments? Any clarification needed? Anything that you're not able to understand? Any topic you want me to go over again now that we have more time? 3 more minutes?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So my favorite book series has like multiple parts, and each part has a different protagonist. So how should I do it in 12 steps? Should I choose one part, or should I do like the overall?
Yeah, I would say one part will be good, because I think otherwise it'll be a lot of work, right? So I'm assuming that one part has a good beginning and goes through all elements and ends up at a resolution, right?
Okay.
So pick one part, I would say. That will avoid you thinking very hard. I think it'll take a lot of time if you want to bundle like 5 books in 5 sentences. I would say just go with one part. Good question. Very good question. And like I said, story is the most foundational thing in writing. Once you know how to drive a car, you can drive any car. You can play with, learn to drive, trucks and things like that. Story is like that. You need to be a master of stories first. And I'm here to answer more questions, but I am also respectful for people, might have a hard stop at 11. So I will stay. You guys can ask questions for the next 5-10 minutes, but if anybody wants to draw, feel free. And if you want to stay and listen to what other questions people might have, feel free to stay.
Sorry, I have another question.
Sure.
Okay, so I know that I have had many debates in literature class about climaxes in certain books. So I'm just wondering, because sometimes it's very hard to identify a climax. So is there so it should be something that relates to the conflict. But I just, because I feel like it can kind of get to be an opinion thing. Is there a very specific way of identifying it?
So it's a great question. And I would say this is more like an art than science, right? So you can't devise tools and techniques to kind of 100% say this is the climax. But I would say the part of your story where the tension is at the peak, where the reader or the viewer of the movie is feeling most excited, is undergoing the most amount of emotions about the movie or the book, is where the climax is. And I would take an example of Argo movie. I don't know if you watched movie Argo, when these guys are returning, they were trying to bring somebody from outside country without the government's intervention. And when they were coming back at the airport, when all of them are being checked, that's where if you are a reader, if you're a viewer, you're totally gone. You're super excited. You're what's going to happen? So that feeling that you get is where the climax is, because tension hits all-time high. So if you plot a graph of how tension is, at various points in your novel or book or movie, the point which is peaking and staying there for some time, I think should be a climax point. But again, people break all these rules all the times, but tension, maximum tension is how they classify generally the climax.
Sorry, I just have a follow-up question on that.
Yeah,
Sorry.
sure.
So in good writing, should you ideally have a very clear climax? Okay.
No, not really. I think it depends. And some books have it scattered all over the book, right? So it's almost like some books are always going in a straight line. Some books have, it built up and then you can feel that there is a climax, right? Some books are, or some stories are more focusing on a very broad, study of human mind than really making events as something that people get interested in, right? So it depends on what kind of writer you are, right? So for example, I would say Kafka's novels, there's no climax as such. It's a study of human psychology, and the character is always struggling with a lot of government, bodies and trying to do something, and is never successful in doing those things. Very, very successful novels, but there's no climax in those novels. So it all depends what you want to create. And there have been beautiful creations that came close to having no climax at all. Make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Somebody else was trying to ask a question. All right then. If no questions, then it was great pleasure to meet each one of you, and hopefully you will stick with the course. It'll get more interesting. It was a lot of theory today because I just wanted to ground you guys in elements that are necessary to start with your short story. So we'll start with 5 sentence or 10 sentence story of your own next time, after I give you some idea in next session about how to get ideas. But for this time, I just wanted you guys to be ready, once we get there, to kind of write that 5 sentence story. It's going to be fun. So stick around for next sessions, and I look forward to seeing you guys again. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.